I went to Australia when I was a young man. Lived there for the better part of a year. And one of the first days I was in Australia, I went up to the bar to get a drink. And I'll never forget this. There's an Aussie standing beside me, and he hears me ask for my drink, and he says, American. And I said, very indignantly, I said, no, I'm Canadian. He said, you're from North America, aren't you? I said, yeah, I'm from North America. He said, well, what's the problem? You're American, aren't you? I said, yeah, I guess I am. I'm American. Welcome to One Dumb Pilgrim. I'm Woody. Hey ho. Here we go. Today we're talking Alberta independence. I'm going to show you exactly how Alberta has been taken advantage of for 155 years, and by the end, you should clearly see why Alberta needs to walk away from the rest of Canada. It wasn't until 1905 that Alberta and Saskatchewan actually became provinces, and it was only 3 years after the first oil well was drilled in Alberta in 1902. Think that was a coincidence? I don't think so. Now, you're probably thinking, what do I care about this? Why should I care? This is all centuries ago. What the dickens does this have to do with anything today? Anything today? Just think back to your own past business and personal relationships. Did you ever felt that you were deceived? Did you ever felt that you were played for a fool? Did you ever felt that you were manipulated? Of course you did. I did. I imagine everyone has. And soon you realize that the way you were treated in the past is generally how the same people will treat you now and in the future. And you handle yourself accordingly. Did you know that from 1870 to 1930, Alberta did not even own its own resources? Become a province in 1905, and it's another 25 years before we actually own what's in the ground? Can you imagine that? Does that make sense to you? Does that sound like a good deal to you? People thousands of miles away are making decisions and using the benefits of your resources with almost no input from you? Would that be a deal you would make? Would that be a deal this guy would make? Am I the only one that thinks this is a little nuts? Over the centuries, keeping Alberta and the West subservient has been done in many ways. Today, our enemies, led by activist organizations funded by George Soros, like Tides, dozens of other ones, by riots and demonstrations against pipelines and oil field and mining expansion, paid for with our money. Where did you think all those billions siphoned out of the government coffers by the Liberals went? To fund online trolls, to fund demonstrations, to fund riots, to fund lawfare. Historically, the National Energy Policy, the Canadian Wheat Board, there's dozens of examples where policy and laws were passed to keep central Canada the center of the universe, and the hell with everyone else in Canada. That is why, regardless who the next Prime Minister is, Alberta needs to move towards sovereignty. Pierre Poilievre, God bless you, I hope you win. Your massive rallies prove that the country wants you. Big rallies in the West, big rallies in Central Canada, big rallies out East. The competition can't seem to draw flies. But sooner or later, everyone's reign ends, good or bad, or indifferent for that matter. Everyone's reign ends. Sooner or later, Central Canada will get the power back, and Alberta will be knee-deep in regulations once again. Whether it's 4 years, 8 years, 12, 124, Central Canada will get the power back, and they will continue with their lies to get Alberta and the West to do whatever they want. The times may change, the faces may change, the clothing may change. Tactics don't change. You lie to get what you want, and then make excuses why you can't follow up with them. It's been done for 155 years. Nothing's going to change. Today I am Alberta. My labor and resources are taxed, exploited by a federal government that I have never, ever in 120 years been able to elect. An Alberta vote means nothing. Nothing in Canada. For over 40 years, I have been forced to turn over billions of dollars to other parts of the country that refuse to work, refuse to maximize their own resources, and refuse to help me expand. Quebec and Ontario determine the Prime Minister and the ruling party every 4 years. 172 seats in Parliament is a majority in Canada. And as you can see by the graphics, Ontario and Quebec have 200 seats between them. So carry Central Canada, and it doesn't matter how the rest of the election goes. It doesn't matter how the rest of the country votes. When my election results start coming in, it's already known who the Prime Minister is and the ruling party will be. Generally, the only thing left to do is to figure out how many seats they're going to end up with. You know, in Alberta, we've finally woken up to the fact Central Canada has played us for suckers for 150 plus years. And we've had about enough. We've had enough with this chaos. We've had enough of our Eastern masters allowing and promoting runaway illegal immigration, turning a blind eye to rampant lawlessness and violence, piling carbon tax on top of more taxes. The carbon tax hasn't been eliminated, folks. It's been stuck on the back burner until Carney gets elected. Then it's going to get worse. We can't elect him. It's not what the country wants. They'll steal the election if they're able. You know, we're broke. There's no money out there. No one has any cash. But politicians continue to spend like drunken sailors, giving away billions of our dollars to overseas vanity projects. Once again, to fund online trolls, lawfare, all the chaos that's happening in our society is being funded by us through the deep state. You know, not only do my brothers and sisters not help me, but they actively work against me. On one hand, they campaign and pass legislation against me, and with the other hand, they clean out my wallet. Then they reach into my pants pockets looking for the loose change. I mean, really, isn't that biting the hand that feeds you? Come on. Get a grip. And Alberta is where we are today because we believed in the Central Canada. We believed in the promises made to us. You know, and we're living the reality that was imposed on us in 1980 by Pierre Trudeau, Justin's father. And this is how it came down in 1980. Alberta signed on to the repatriated Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This was Prime Minister Pierre's lasting legacy, and he wanted it. 9 of 10 provinces signed on. 1 didn't. I bet you can guess who didn't. Yup, it was Quebec. To get 9 of 10 provinces to sign on to Pierre's repatriation project, backroom deals, they had to be made with every premier, with every province, and they were promised whatever they needed to promise them to get their vote. You know, Alberta was promised new pipelines to the north, new pipelines to the east. Other promises were made to provinces on things that were important to them. For Alberta, nothing ever happened. Pierre Trudeau did not follow through with any pipeline promised in the National Energy Program of 1980. Not 1 foot of pipe was ever laid. Excuses were made. They said times have changed. You know, the oil is not needed right now. Oil is not needed. It runs our society. It runs our civilization. Until there's a solution to something else, it will always run our civilization. Can no one look 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road? Plan for the future? They won't even let us get our products out to Tidewater. You know, Japan, Great Britain, France, I think Germany, other countries asked for our liquefied natural gas. And Justin Trudeau, the great businessman, turned down billions of dollars in sales. Wonder where that came from. Beijing would be my guess. You know, it's in effect written in stone that any province that produces more than it consumes is required to pay into an equalization pot of gold that other parts of Canada that couldn't or wouldn't make ends meet could draw against, administered by, of course, the federal government. How could any province sign on to this? This is a communist core at the substance of the federal and provincial agreement that we've been living with since 1980. You know, for the last 45 years, you've got a federal program ingrained in the psyche of a free nation that works against the ethics of hard work, works against democracy, works against responsibility, and instead says, let's reward the provinces that won't maximize their own resources with an equalization payment scheme. You know, if that's not socialism, I must have been misinformed. Is this right? Is it fair? Is this communism? Of course it is. One thing is absolutely certain. If you rob Peter to give it to Paul, you can always be sure of the support of Paul. You know, Alberta's resource income is Canada's largest source of revenue, yet the rest of Canada will not help us build pipelines, a Texas-grade oil refinery, or any other industry that would boost production and income. My brothers and sisters won't even help build a pipeline across Canada, which could deliver cheap, plentiful oil and natural gas across central and eastern Canada and bring with it high-paying jobs. When I was a young man, I worked in the oil patch for a time. We were told in the 1980s that there was enough oil in the oil sands to power the entire planet for 200 years. That's a lot of petroleum. And for decades, blocking any pipeline progress is the eco-lobby and their bought and paid for politicians and bureaucrats. God save us from bureaucrats. You know, all funded by our economic and cultural enemies. You know, well, in Alberta, we've woken up. And we're going to walk away from this horseshit arrangement one way or the other. I mean, realistically, wouldn't you, based on what you've just heard? How can any sane person think things will get better? They never have. They never will. In the past 11 years, Alberta has contributed $240 billion to the rest of Canada, with no say on how it gets spent. Prorate that over 45 years, it's $1 trillion being sucked from our province, with little or no return on our money. Of these equalization payments, Quebec gets the lion's share, spend any which way they want, and it's mostly on social programs to get their citizens even more tied to their government. What does that sound like? Does that sound like communism? My sister Quebec, you are so beautiful. Montreal is a spectacular city. It's a world-class city. It's spectacular. You have massive resources in your province, but your entire regulatory process is designed to scare off investment. And now you've got Stephen Guilbeault running herd on your province. Nothing's going to get approved. Everything will be stalled, put off, or regulated into bankruptcy. Is that really what Quebecers want? Less prosperity? Yeah, I can see it now. They're going to walk up to you and say, yeah, I want to make less money than I did last year. Have you ever heard anyone say that? Have you ever thought that? Of course not. No one wants less prosperity. And guess who gave this wanker his mandate? Mark Carney. Mark Carney. And what does Alberta get? Yep, shit and abuse. Okay, I hear your outrage. Remember one thing, please. It's only the truth that hurts. And to quote a famous Canadian, come on, give your balls a tug. I ask you, based on this information, what would you do for your Alberta? Keep dealing with these promise anything, deliver nothing Eastern Canadian oligarchs? Carrying on? You know, keep your mouth shut and do as you're told? Or would you strike out on your own? You know, I say Alberta should be walking away as fast as our petroleum-soaked feet can take us. Well, we should be running away. You know, realistically, who wants to deal with these jokers anymore? They say one thing in the morning, then the opposite at night. They say one thing in French, then the other thing in English. They have a private meeting with our Premier Danielle, and they promise her one thing or tell her one thing, and then he comes out and goes to a news conference and says the opposite. How can you trust anyone that speaks out of both sides of their mouth? You know, it smells like a PR stunt written by ChatGPT, for crying out loud. Is that what you boys did? You went and asked ChatGPT to get an issue for you? Is that what they came up with? You know, folks, Donald Trump didn't cause our problems. He didn't make our problems. He just shone some light on them. The Liberals have managed to do this to us for the last 10 years. No one's helped them. Well, they have, actually. You know, how can we ever forget how the Liberals lied to us about COVID, how they lied to us about vaccines? They demanded we lock ourselves up, went after our churches and pastors, cost our children a year, maybe 2 years of learning, set them backwards. and then jailed and prosecuted Canadians for the crime of driving to Ottawa and voicing their displeasure with the ruling Trudeau Liberal government. Non-violently, completely peaceful, with bouncy castles, playing street hockey in minus 30 degrees Celsius. Hot dog roasts. They even helped the homeless in downtown Ottawa for the time they were there. And what did the federal government do? They unleashed the RCMP on mounted horses to charge into the crowd. You know, God bless you truckers for going down there and doing that. You know, you paid a heavy price for that. But one good thing was it woke up the world. The truckers woke up the world to what was going on. And now this corrupt party, the Liberal Party, they want us to forget all about that. Now they have a new shiny leader. They're going to steal this election if they can, like they may have done in the 2 previous elections. You know, that's what the RCMP is trying to find out since last fall, and why the Liberals put our government on hold so they don't have to answer. Boy, I sure hate to have to draft a hockey team from these guys. Get your elbows down, get your stick on the ice, and get ready for a pass, girls, because you've just about passed Alberta right out of Canada. Maybe you should stop talking at us and try listening for a change. You know, there's a reason God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. But it wouldn't matter anyway. Even if you listened to us, you wouldn't care. Nothing would change. Nothing's ever changed. Mark Carney, why don't you get your paid-for non-resident Hollywood celeb Mike Myers? Actually, it seems to me that Mr. Carney, you haven't lived in Canada for the last 10, 12 years, have you? Anyway, bring Mike Myers, bring Justin Trudeau with you if you can. Come out west, play a little pickup hockey with me and the boys. We'll see how that elbows up thing plays out. You know, boys, you don't look like Gordie Howe to me. Gordie used to go into the corners with his elbows high. Gordie was a big fella. He terrorized the NHL for like 25 years. God help us from Carney terrorizing Canada for 25 years. Whew. You know, my dad used to say, lead, follow, or get out of the way. So Canada, either work with us or get out of our way. Or we're going to walk away, one way or the other. That's the way that this can play out. Really, only 3 ways.
How dare you?
Thank you, Greta. You know, I used to love Canada. I was a proud Canadian for most of my life. I went to Australia when I was a young man. Lived there for the better part of a year. And one of the first days I was in Australia, I went up to the bar to get a drink. And I'll never forget this. There's an Aussie standing beside me, and he hears me ask for my drink, and he says, American. And I said, very indignantly, I said, no, I'm Canadian. He said, you're from North America, aren't you? I said, yeah, I'm from North America. He said, well, what's the problem? You're American, aren't you? I said, yeah, I guess I am. I'm American. I don't recognize the Canada I see today. I don't recognize it at all. It's been corrupted so far, so much in the last 10 years, it's almost unrecognizable. You know, Alberta, it's time to rethink this whole unwinnable situation within Canada. And you know something else? My pal and I, Saskatchewan, we're part American already. The Cypress Hills in the south corner of our 2 provinces is the same ecosystem as the Black Hills of South Dakota. The Cypress Hills is where Sitting Bull brought 5,000 Lakota after the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876. It has the same type of rolling terrain, rolling hills, and vegetation as the Black Hills has. It's so beautiful. It's such an unusual ecosystem. We made an interprovincial park out of it. You know, looking back at 1870 and Alberta's relationship with Central Canada, as an Albertan, I have to admit, I've been a fool for believing in a Canada that hasn't believed in me for 155 years. You know, based on these facts, what would you do if you were Alberta? Would you continue on as an indentured servant to Central Canada? Virtually a slave to policy determined 2,000 miles away by politicians who for the most part do not have our best interest at heart. The faces may change, the decades may change, the centuries may change, the clothing may change. The tactics don't change. The results don't change. The lies don't change. Really, the answer is separation. And come on, Saskatchewan and the eastern half of British Columbia, join us. You know you want to. Based on our shared history, Central Canada will never be our friend. They haven't in the past, they won't in the future. But together, we could forge a new reality that is better for all our people out west. You know, really, the future is bright in that direction if we can pull it together. We need to start talking about this. What do you think? Should Alberta separate from Canada? Join America? Should we go it alone? Should we join Greenland? That's probably not going to happen. Is this the right course to take, or do we have other ideas? Do you have other ideas? You know, let us know in the comments. Thanks for sharing your time with One Dumb Pilgrim. I'm Woody. And please, if anything hit home, like and subscribe and share the video. That would be just tickety-poo and all free to do and gives the Pilgrim a big boost with Comrade YouTube. Thank you, John Stossel. And remember, it costs nothing to be nice.